Okay, thanks everybody. Great to see all your faces here. Welcome to the November meeting of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Everything good online? Zoom folks, you guys hear me okay? Making sure. Great. So let's start how we always do with a little round of introductions. I will start and I'll pass the mic around. We're doing the microphone so that the folks on the Zoom can hear, because if we walk away from the screen, they can't hear anymore. So not the best, but enjoy the sound of your voice. I'm Pedro Marquez, Executive Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Also, Warrior Sportsman, landlord.
Susan Stone, Big Hole Ranch.
Sam Stone, Big Hole Ranch. Craig Fellman, outfitter, Wise River.
Jim Menahee, Blue Silver Bowl Water Utility.
Brian Wheeler, Executive Director of Big Hole River Foundation.
Chris Edgington, Montana Fire Limited.
Jim Berkey, the Nature Conservancy.
Ryan Hart, Rancher Seamarket.
Andy Smith, Rancher Glenn.
Matt Norberg, Montana DEQ.
Jim McGee, Fish and Wildlife Service.
Vince Jones, a rancher at Wise River.
I'm Ben Laporte, the Programs Manager for the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
I'm Tana Olson, the Executive Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Sorry, Pedro.
Not quite yet, Tim. All right, we'll start with, as we always do, with our hydro report from Matt Norberg. Stepping up to the mic, thanks. I could pull it up, Tana, but I think you're sharing, right? So. Oh no, but then I can't, but then it's not up.
Right, I can either put it on the screen or I can.
I'll do it. I got it, and then and then I got to make sure to share it too. So share that one. All right. Is that working? Do you see the right thing? Oh, on the Zoom.
You're sharing now.
I am? Okay, so it looks work. Okay. All right. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, everyone. I guess, just to start off, we just turned over a new water year in October, so things are pretty fresh. Totals are, fairly low for, this time of year in general. But I guess I just want to go through, how we are up to date right now. Our stream flow gauges, they're all seasonal gauges in the Big Hole. And right now, they're all shut down with the exception of the Melrose gauge, which is just slightly below the median for this time of year. One thing that, and they will be coming back online April 1st of next year, as they do every year. One thing I wanted to bring up, this does have kind of impact on how people perceive the numbers that are put out there. So a lot of the percentages and the totals and things like that I report on for Snowpack and Precip, that's all from the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. And they do 30-year periods of statistics. And so back probably in the 90s, you were looking at the 1971 period to the 2000 period. And then just recently, last year we were 81 to 2010. And so just recently we've switched over, every decade it switches over to the next 30-year period. So now we are in the 2010 to 1991 to 2020 timeframe. So what that means is if you look historically, snowpack, precip, things like that, I mean, there's no secret that we've kind of decreased over the years, right? So if you take a percentage back in, say, 1980 from that 30-year time frame, and then, say it was 100% snowpack, right? And then you compare that to what is 100% snowpack now, it's not apples to apples per se. I mean, it's, you're looking at probably, and I'm generalizing here a little bit, but you're looking at less moisture when you say 100% in general, right? So take those numbers into account as we move forward, and especially since we just transitioned over to this next 30-year time frame. There is, and if you go on the minutes, I put a link in here, and there's a really good description about how they calculate these things, medians, averages, why they do what they do, and then it shows some different, well, actually I have some graphs here that'll show exactly what I was talking about. Oops. You guys see that very well? Okay. So this top one right here is snow water equivalent, what we call sweep. And blue is the max line. The dotted green line is the 81 to 2010 median. And then the solid, the red line's the minimum, and then that solid green line is the new normal. So you can see right here, and obviously we're going to start off, we're going to go through, majority of the year, probably comparative, right? Because, a little bit, it doesn't, the percentages aren't going to change that much. But you can really start to see, as you get here in peak snowpack and things like that, how those normals really start to change from that last period to this new period. So again, take that into account. And this is snowpack. What I find is a little bit interesting, it's really hard to see them. Is this, this is the precip one over the course of the water year. And, tracking pretty good, but if you were to zoom in a little bit through here, we're actually looking at a little bit more precip over from, as we transition into this new normal 30-year period than there was before. I have some theories on that. They're just theories. But I think, one of the things that we've seen is we've seen some of these, we may not be getting the natural progression of, rain throughout the summer that we have, but when we do, it's high intensity, right? So we're getting, 1 to 2 inches instead of a ½ inch. All of a sudden we're getting this 4-inch storm. So maybe the totals are just a little bit bigger moving into this new period, but I just wanted to bring this up because it does have impacts on how you look when you say 100% or 90%. It's not necessarily the same as if you were to look at that back in the 80s or something like that. So
that's pretty consistent with climate predictions models.
it is
More recent, but the staggered throughout the year and more intense.
And I think this is kind of obvious here as well. If you look at the departure from this new normal, from the previous normal here in snowpack, and you see that it's less, but you see through here where our new normal is actually a little bit higher in precip, and that does, I think, lend to some of those higher intensity events. Yeah, but
why don't they have like why isn't there a shifting window instead of an awkward or a decade break? Because it seems like then we can't compare data from the last couple of years with next year. Not easily, at least.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that's probably a statistics question, but I'm not, I don't think I'm trying to answer that one. It's been a long time.
Well, why couldn't you run comparisons between?
I'm asking, why couldn't you run comparisons between the high
analyzing those and from a different 10-year period. And it's so that you can get, a feel for what the ups and downs really are.
Well, you absolutely can do that. Yeah. I'm trying to be unbiased when I present this data. And so I'm trying to present exactly what they are showing, because I mean, those are the authorities on their stuff, but I totally understand what you're saying. And I can look at something like that. I can definitely try and present something.
It seems to me that we keep shifting the goals, but you're not getting an accurate picture of what they always actually been occurring in the extended period of time.
Yeah, so they're on this website that we pull a lot of this information off of. There's different metrics that you can select, basically. So the one that is the most familiar to people is this one, and it's the median from this 30-year period. But you can also you can pull up just a period of record. So we'll say dark horse, which is the upper big hole high elevation. And you can select that, and you can look at the entire range that sensor has been in existence, and you can compare that. So you could do that from all the different snow-tell sites in the basin. Record. That's one way you can kind of, I guess, not normalize it, but you could compare. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's really the snowpack and the precip stuff. And again, I didn't spend a lot of time in this because we're still pretty fresh, and things can change dramatically, especially when you have, you start off with 0 and then you get, 1 inch or something like that. Makes a huge difference in the way that the percentages are perceived. So let's see, this graph is total precip in the big hole. Right now we're at 99% of the median value. So off to a good start, and I think a lot of that is, it's a high elevation snow, and we've had some rain. And the grain of salt, the value that snowpack, that SWE is being reported from the NRCS is 54% right now. I don't know if I buy that. I think there's a little bit of misinformation, and I think what's going on. But I did post it on there because that's what they have on their website, and I didn't want to try and make up numbers. So this is the snowpack one, and it's really hard to see, but so the green line is the median line for this new normal, and then here we are down here, so we're well below what they're reporting. However, they're only reporting 3 of the 9 sites right now. And I think what's going on is since they switched over to this new normal, I think there's some IT things or some problems that they're having getting their median value. So they're just not analyzing all of those sites, and they're cherry picking 3 of them, right? Because that's the one that they have numbers on. So I think it's a little misleading at the moment. Hopefully, as we progress through the winter, they'll get this rectified. I was just looking at some of the higher elevation, like Dark Horse, and they're saying that that's 99%, and it's 5 inches of SWE right now. So again, I put that on there because that's what is on their website, but buyer beware a little bit on that one. So I've kind of been putting this up last couple slides, or last couple of presentations, and it's just the drought monitor that we have from Montana, and this is all across the United States as well. So as of November 9th, probably half of the big hole is in category D4, which is pretty severe drought, exceptional drought, they label it. And then the rest of Beaverhead County is in extreme drought. And I guess the reason that I'm putting this up here now is because I don't want people to forget. I know you won't forget after this last year, but it gets cold, maybe you get some rain, a little snow on the ground. You're like, oh, no, this isn't bad. Maybe there's a little bit of regrowth in October and greens up a little bit. We're not out of the woods. I mean, we are in a big deficit. The big hole in Beaverhead County in general, big deficit from this last year. It's going to take a tremendous amount of of snowpack and sweet to catch back up to average, let alone even be, you know, maybe above. So just remember that. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but I'm trying to be realistic about this and explain that we are still in a drought and it's going to take a lot of catching up to get us back to even average. And the 7-day forecast doesn't really do a whole lot for that. It's kind of what you'd expect. Kind of gray, 30s, 40s, slight chance of rain here and there, maybe some snow in the high elevations. Nothing, no big storms forecasted in the next, you know, probably 7 to 10 days, but that's just the you know, near-term forecast. Currently, we are in what's called an La Nina, and I wasn't here for last meeting. Pedro presented on this, but you know what we got is we had a La Nina last year that didn't pan out as well as we were hoping, especially for Montana. But what they call this is a double dip La Nina, so that means back-to-back years of La Nina conditions where the sea surface temperatures are lower. 0.5 degrees lower than the average. And, you know, I'm trying to be optimistic about this. The long-term forecasts, which I'll get into, are favorable. But when we have these double dip La Nina years, these back-to-back La Nina years, it typically favors a strong winter for Montana. And this next picture, which I had on last month's as well, shows just this, really. So this is the number of times that a back-to-back La Nina where the winters were wetter than normal. And this right here is just the color code is, you know, how many years out of 15. And if you look at Montana, and specifically the big hole right here, you know, we're looking 9 to 10 years that we've had 9 to 10 times out of those double back-to-back years, we typically experience a wetter than normal winter for Montana, which is really good news. We need it. So that's a little bit of optimism. Let's just hope that hopefully we go to the, you know, the 11-12 mark. So then here is the 3-month outlook. And it's favorable. And it's kind of playing into what I just showed with these back-to-back years. So our temperature, you know, moving forward December, January, and February, we're looking at you know, below normal condition or below normal temperatures. And then for precip, we're also looking at above normal precip. You know, I mean, these are the forecasts. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean like way above? You know, just a little bit above? It's really variable. But they are forecasting that it's going to be cooler and wetter than our normal conditions. So there's some good news, hopefully. That's all I got. Any questions? Don't ask me about statistics, but okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Okay. All right. I'll jump on. Give you all director's report now. Let me just do some Zoom stuff. Pull that up. Tana, you got me? All right. So just from my desk, kind of things that I'm working on, thinking about, what's been taking my time. I'll run through them real quickly. Really want to make sure that, that Brian gets, you know, a bunch of time to talk about his stuff. You know, I think first things first, what's really on my mind is we've got our Drought Committee meeting on December 14th. And after a year like this one, you know, our whole drought management plan and platform, it's working. It's a great vehicle. I'm really, it's impressive that it's been going for 26 years. So I'll start by saying, like, it's a hell of a thing that we've got here in the watershed. This year, I think, really tested kind of its function, how it works, and how we execute that plan, right? So a lot of questions came up for me. You know, how much, what are our feedback mechanisms during a year of drought? as far as communications with irrigators, communications with the recreation community. I think there's some questions like that that I think will be worth bringing up at this committee meeting. And I'm really pushing our irrigators to be front and center of this thing. There's been a couple years now where we've been sitting in these committee meetings, and it's really been heavy on agency representatives and the watershed committee. And we're kind of talking about making decisions that have to do with irrigation and pulling water, and there's no irrigators in the room, right? So I'm really pushing to get folks at the table so that we can make this drought plan as effective as possible. This is one of those years where, when there's nothing coming out of the tributaries, there's only so much you can do with the drought plan, right? But I think that there's value in transparency, communication, and understanding what irrigators are doing and what the conservation that is happening on the ground, and making sure to communicate that out, right? Because kind of as we predicted early on in our early meetings, this is going to be a stressful year, and the worst time to try to address the situation is going to be in the height of full-on stress, right? June, July, August, when everyone is just super stressed out. That's not when we're going to make changes and get everybody sitting at the table, right? That's when people are chewing each other's heads off. Like, now's the time, let's revisit what worked, what didn't. So, Tan and I are going to work really hard on that agenda for that meeting and making it as productive as possible for everyone.
I love you. I love you, Valerie.
Okay, enough for that. So that'll be December 14th. I was made aware of the Fish and Wildlife Commission is going to meet in December. They're actually going to relook at some of the regs that they changed on the big hole at their December meeting. So it came to light kind of after the decision was made back in maybe the August meeting when they changed some of the fishing regs. Some of the dates and the timing have been brought into question of just how early, how late in the spring they're opening things back up, and how early in the fall they're closing things down. So that's going to come up at the December meeting of the commission. So something to keep an eye on. And Eric at Sunrise Flash Up got a call from Casey Walsh, and they had this discussion, and Casey felt like it was an important issue to bring back up and revisit. And we're talking tweaks of 15, 20 days, on either end, but that might be significant for the outfitting guide community for their clients. So we'll see where that goes. Something to be aware of. Okay, a book about the big hole and its history. Tana, do you want to pass that thing around? So Tana's passing around. This is a simple little thing, but we were approached by this publishing company that has an interesting business model. They basically say, hey, why don't you write this book, and then we'll sell it for you and distribute it for you and market it for you. It's basically a picture-heavy book. These things, you'll see them all over the place. In gas stations and at local mercantiles and things like that. They've done one on Beaverhead County. Anyway, they pitched to us the possibility of doing a big hole, like a book on the history of the big hole. It's 128 pages, pretty standard format. It's all pictures, really picture heavy. So we're entertaining that possibility as the watershed committee potentially being the author of this thing. But really, we wouldn't do the work. We would be reaching out to the community, and really, you all are the ones that have the historical photographs, and the history is yours to tell. So that's an opportunity that's sitting out there. We're not moving on it. We don't have any grant money to pay our time to do this. But if there is interest, and if folks come out of the woodwork and want to put something together, we're here to support. And we think it'd be an interesting situation. Yeah.
There's also it's quite a large book. Book one, Wisdom has it, it's history of big holes. It's fairly substantial.
Yeah, there's the Pat Monday one, right? Yeah. Yeah, there is that is the one, and that came to mind when this came out, but that's a very different thing. You can put that in your back pocket. You can't take that big whole history book around with you unless you need a doorstop.
Yeah, so like Pedro said, we're still considering this, but if we do decide to do this, we would kind of craft it around natural resources. So if you think about it, the big hole is really developed around natural resources, whether they be timber, minerals, water, land. So we think that we could pretty easily pull that content together and tie it into the big hole and the state of the watershed as it stands today. And then they also give the authors 8% royalties, which works out to be about $2 per book. So the idea is, if we do this, we would put that back into our conservation fund. So it'd be a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, so, folks have, that sounds interesting to folks, and, kind of telling the story. Really, their pitch to us was, this place, it's your story to tell, right? They have no say in the content of the book. They just have a pretty standardized kind of format for how these things get out there. So as always, I will respond to enthusiasm and put my energy where the enthusiasm is. I push enough boulders uphill on a daily basis, and I don't need another one. So if you guys are excited about the idea, we will be too. Okay, real quick, JKCS is our accounting firm, and we just happen to see that it's their 75th year, and they're giving out 10 grants of $7,500. And there's a form on their website to just go in there and nominate an organization. And so I kicked it out to the governing board. You guys kick it out to everyone you know. Please just name, title, why should the big hole get this money? Fill that in up until the 28th of November. It's about the easiest $7,500 we could ever make. So we like that. So governing board folks, if you've gotten it, I could even pull it up right here during the break or after the meeting, and y'all just come in here and just fill it out. Let's get that money. No, there's no restrictions on that money, which is the kind of money we like. That capacity funding is just critical. I said the other day, and that's along the lines of what I'm presenting on, is just, I feel like I've been speaking and invited to groups and groups and groups, and like, there's no lack of tables to sit at, but there's really not a lot of money out there for us to go sit at those tables. It's kind of a little bit of a gamble on your time and energy and sort of what you're getting out of each engagement, but the exposure is out there, the watershed committees, work is getting out there. What the return is on those investments of time, we're not sure yet, right? So anyway, this is kind of just an easy way to get out there and get a little bit more capacity funding that supports us to be able to do these meetings and workshops. And I've been participating in a lot of that kind of thing this month. Our fall newsletter is at the printers. We're excited about it. There's a lot of great things to report despite a really horrendous water year. So I think that we're on track to actually have it out by Thanksgiving, hopefully, and if not on Thanksgiving, just after. So Tana's just done an excellent job with the newsletter this time, as she has actually for the last couple of years. It's been just getting better and better. We hope you guys like the content, and we're always open to ideas. What's missing? Speaking engagements, boy, I mean, we've been talking on soil health, been talking about nonprofit capacity. I just presented today for the National Wildlife Foundation on permitting, low-tech restoration. Was invited to go to Silver Bow, Wyoming. They're really interested in just the whole concept of holding back the snowpack as just sort of a land management strategy, right? They really liked our video and are inviting me down in January to talk to their conservation district at Saratoga Springs. Another interested group of folks from Idaho Falls that we're talking to, and we've got some engagements set up for next year, Montana Stormwater Conference, and at the Natural Resource Damage Programs conference talking about restoration work. So a lot of opportunities for exposure. The last thing I will hit on is this ARPA money. Boy, there's a lot of money coming out for projects, especially for irrigation. So the American Recovery Plan Act had specifically earmarked money for irrigation projects we actually qualify, and I'm going to verify this, we actually qualify as a water users association, so we can actually be the applicant for this money. There's no required match. Match helps you in your scoring. So, you know, the stuff that we're looking at, Liz, in Wise River, and if there's a lot of irrigation needs, these grants are up to $500,000. So I'm looking real seriously at those, and I'll need to kind of visit with landowners, and really the first thing is get some cost estimates together for projects and needs that folks have kind of as quickly as possible. These applications are January 15th. So Liz, I'm glad you're here. You've been on my mind to touch base and you know, get some of the Miller's folks out there and start looking at some potential costs for projects. Yeah, all right, I will leave it at that. Any questions for me?
One question.
Yes, sir.
So the whole commission,
Yeah,
brown trout regulations,
Yeah.
it's clear cut, having been involved in the groups, focus groups, et cetera, right up to it. But the initial plan was to close the river October 1st, which is when spawning occurs generally right early October. Somehow, and having been involved with the meeting or zoomed in on the commission meeting, it ended up being November 1st for reasons that really weren't clear. It really wasn't clear why that happened at the last minute. So I'm sure hoping, especially after watching brown trout spawning on October 8th heavily, that they are able to reverse this back to what was originally discussed. There was a lot of time that went into those discussions.
Yeah.
Purely October 1st, September 30th was the initial dates, and the later date, the spring dates were generally earlier than the third Saturday.
Yeah.
So if the idea is, and for sure to protect brown trout, we're hoping the commission, and it would be great if the Big Hole Watershed Committee would make that pitch that it's about protecting the grounds. That's the most important thing. It's not about the economics so much. Yeah. That it goes back to October 1st. As we remember,
This is Wade from Big Hole Lodge, and I second everything you're saying. Casey Walsh, in response to a letter I wrote with a few other outfitters, asked that we get to them ahead of their meetings instead of respond to them after their meetings. So I'm seconding your call to get a hold of the commissioners prior to the meeting on that issue. I think October 1st is great, and Big Hole Lodge is happy to sign on.
Right, yeah. And from what I heard also, it's the spring date, moving it yet earlier. Well, right now, you know, you're only allowed to fish. They want to, the idea is that's being proposed of allowing fishing to start earlier. And some of the logic there is no one's wade fishing in, you know, 1200 CFS when the river is kind of up and raging. So the danger to the reds may not actually be there. They're still spawning because you're not getting that foot traffic on the river. Is some of how I'm understanding it. So Wade, are you going to be there? Are you going to chime in at that meeting? Are you going to be listening in, or what are you hearing as the most effective kind of strategy?
Well, I think if we as a community can get together and decide, I mean, spawning this year, we had guide trips where we spent part of the day rowing around and showing people what a red was through the first 2 weeks of October. And we closed our season with an educational 3-day event that Brian, who's your speaker tonight, spoke at. And that was a big topic. Why is the river still open if we're trying to protect brown trout who are struggling? Why are we teaching clients what a red looks like? Let's just have the thing closed. So I think if we as a community agree on that, and Big Hole River Foundation and Watershed Committee agree on that, let's pool together a letter and get it to the commissioners well before their meeting rather than the day of.
awesome.
Sounds reasonable enough. Is that on me to start? Well,
Yeah, that's short and sweet.
yeah, no, we'll do it short and sweet. I just want to make sure I get the dates and everything right. So, you know, Wade, I think if you guys could just shoot me the right info, I'll be happy to draft up a letter for distribution and kind of thumbs up and agreement among the committee.
Sounds great.
No, I just have a suggestion. Okie was involved in a lot of legislation or things like that happening. You do your letter, have it signed by everybody, but have people call the commissioners too, individually. And the more the merrier, may irritate them, but you know, you can kind of organize the calling group and the days and that is a hell of a big effect.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can do our part, I think, to mobilize. And from my understanding of these conversations earlier on, as far as ag and irrigators and folks, these dates don't really impact you all very much at all, does it? Is that fair to say? Okay. Great.
So Pedro, I'd be curious to see what Wade's feelings are. I mean, October 1st, April 1st, April 30th, May 1st. What's his thought on the back end? I think October 1st is clear on the front end.
Yeah. Wade, did you hear that question? October 1st kind of sounds pretty clear on the fall date. And what about spring? What are your thoughts on the spring date for opening up? When does it feel safe?
I would defer to Jim Olson, and I think we ought to get a hold of him and see what his thoughts are. I've never experienced a rainbow with saprolignia. I don't see them spawning, like you say, there's a ton of water. It's usually cold. They're not stressed seemingly, but I would be curious what he thinks our impact as anglers has on spawning rainbows and cutthroat in the spring.
Okay. Here comes Brian.
I think just very simply, you don't have to put a lot of fluff into it. The biologist recommendation was from October 1st to March 31st. It's as simple as that.
We will not get into what's going on there with the agency and why that recommendation isn't, clear as day for them. But that's part of some of the shifting landscape that we're dealing with, right? So we'll make that, if that sounds pretty clear, right? March 31st. And I think that's even earlier than I think what Eric Thorson had talked about as far as the dates that would be preferable for them. So.
You'll find out that the goddamn river up here isn't all opened up. You're supposed to March 31st. We'll find that out. I know. Any of these guys from the Dickey Bridge up, that used to be closed until the 15th of May. And I've seen that water so goddamn high that there was a guy went swimming in it up there. That's been 40 years, close to 40 years ago. And I'm pouring him up down here below here at that was Tommy Fantastic.
Cool. That's a long way.
And I know my son went swimming in that river. He is forced ended up in that ditch down there.
So May 15th.
It's flowing so damn fast, 35 miles an hour. Ain't no worry, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, no one's wade fishing in that stuff, right?
When you start fishing there, up there, above the Dickey Bridge, it's painful. It's because the water's like, you're gonna kill fish. I don't care what anybody says. You want to fight the goddamn brown trout are becoming smaller because they've been fished too much. And not only that, but they're introduced fish. They aren't native to the big hole.
Yeah, that one I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, no, it's tricky business. I will follow up with all of y'all. I will put those dates and make sure that we got, wide acceptance on that. And so, if our organizations, speak at the commission or call, we're speaking with one voice, ideally, that's how we want to do it.
One last quick note.
Yeah, quick note, Brad.
There's nothing that says these have to be permanent either. Let's try them for a while. Let's see if it makes an appreciable difference on the ground trout populations. If it does, great, continue. If it doesn't, it's something else elsewhere.
Point well taken. Okay. I'm gonna get off this mic and pass it over to, Tana, should we do you or are we gonna do steering? Steering committee. We've got one steering committee member. Any updates, sir? Yeah. Is it next week or the week after? Week after. Steering committee and I will be touching base within a week, or within 2 weeks, sorry, and we'll have a lot more to update. We've had some scheduling issues trying to get together. All right, we're gonna move on then to our wildlife update. Is that Sharon okay?
Yes.
Oh, cool. That's cool. Okay, I'm gonna not share this. Hang on, folks. Oh, this camera's gotta be really red. I look real red. Okay, here we go. Tana, share that screen.
Okay, so the wildlife report should be pretty quick today. I attended a Beyond Conflict workshop put on by the Western Landowners Alliance, November 8th through 10th. It was virtual. Some interesting conversations about non-lethal conflict reduction. And then I just wanted to mention that we'll be doing our carcass removal and composting again this spring. So we generally do that March through May. It's a ways off yet, but we don't need it until February. So I just thought I'd mention it. I have these magnets. I should have those on the back table if anyone would like one. Information about that. And you can also text carcass to 26989 to get connected with the program. That's really all I have, except that a board member sent us some concerns about the McCartney Mountain elk herd. And apparently there are just, it's a very large herd. And apparently we've heard reports that the elk are in fairly poor condition and that the harvest has been low over there. And that, so there's concerns that there are so many of these elk that if more aren't harvested, that they'll suffer from disease. So I'm not really sure I'm not really sure what our path forward there is unless we want to try and talk to FWP about changing the targets there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the suggestion. We're saying just open it up more harvest, get them moving more hunters, more harvests.
Yeah.
Off their crops.
So the feedback we've had is that there are too many, I'm sorry, I'm not a hunter, so I'm doing my best here. But the feedback we've had is that there are too many bull elk now, and it's too easy to get a bull when you have an either sex option. And so the suggestion is to make bulls a brow tine or better draw tag and make cow harvest over the counter. So anyway, I don't know if anybody else is familiar with that area or having any issues. Oh, okay. Do you want to add anything? Well,
so maybe the watershed.
Oh,
Yeah, just for folks on Zoom, I'll just rephrase kind of what Randy's chimed in, saying that it does look like the biologists are looking at management tools, expanding the hunt, a late season hunt, potentially some damage hunts, opportunities, and just generally expanding the harvest options around this side of Pioneer and also around McCarthy. All right, that's it for Tana. Any questions, other wildlife concerns, issues? Hearing none, I will move to the restoration update. And just give me 1 second, pull that up. Cool. And that screen out of that. Yeah, let me just make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Because we got to do two things. We got two audiences. There you go. Sweet.
Right. Cool, guys. I'll run through the highlights of my last month. I know that the last time we met, I introduced our Smith Sage Springs restoration project, and I was working on a couple grants, or one big grant to get that thing going. Since the last we met, I got that thing in, and today I presented to the review panel on that project, and this is a large wet meadow mesic kind of peat bog system that we're hoping to restore, and Jim McKee's a large partner in that and very involved. So fingers crossed on that. I also got our large scale restoration forestry grant finally in, and that was a big one. So that consumed a little bit of time. Again, fingers crossed on that one so we can get some good forestry work done around the big hole. Another highlight of my month was I did a second round of fish introductions in the East Fork of Divide Creek. And that's this photo right here. This is Kevin Weiner. He's the hydrologist with the Forest Service. And we did one round of fish introductions up there after our 2019 project where we plugged these remnant beaver dams. And one of the benefits and the outcomes of that project was, say, hey, there's a cascade that's impending brook trout passage up it. So this is really good cold water refugia for West Slope cutties. And we did one. And Kevin went up there this summer and saw a good amount that were still in the stream. And so we went back up there and put 100 or 250 more West Slope cutties in there. So I think it's a really cool thing to be a part of. Hopefully with this second round of introductions, we can get a sustainable population of West Slope cutties up there. Another big kind of chunk of time I spent this month was this aspen restoration on the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area. We're looking at about 160 acres of aspen enhancement work. About 143 acres will be on the North Fork of California up here. This is part of the project site that we've been working with the Natural Resource Damage Program with over the last 10 years. And so one of the positive outcomes is like, hey, there's a ton of aspen that we can light up and open up. And in the meantime, we can plug up some gullies that are still carrying sediment, and that's kind of this green, the green arrows or the green lines are these gullies that we plan to plug up. So right across the highway, this is 569, we have another project that we're going to do aspen enhancement work on, and that's these peat polygons. And this is also part of our Upper Oregon Creek restoration project. So multi-resource benefits are going to come out of this thing. We're going to use all the aspen slash and plug up gullies. FWP plans on getting some commercial material out of there. It's kind of bushy, lodgepole, but they're going to do the best they can. And then we'll also use that slash to plug up a bunch of gullies and impede sediment coming off the hillside there. And at the same time, we're going to completely vegetate this whole entire drainage up here, the Upper Oregon Creek drainage. Also, a lot of my time this month has been spent on these bank stabilization projects. I've been talking about these for a couple of meetings now, but we're doing one on the lower portion of the river, south of Glen, and we're doing one near Wisdom, actually, north of Jackson. And on Monday, we broke ground on project, I just wanted to show you guys some photos. This is the project site here, this photo, this is the bank. This is the landowner's ditch running right parallel to it. So first thing we did was put the ditch over here so we can actually make way for all the bank work. And I did an assessment on this bank, and it's estimated that it's contributing about 35 tons of sediment into the system per year. So it's going to be very beneficial, especially talking about brown trout, right? And then, so these are just some pictures I took. We're running and gunning on the project. We're all week on it. I'll be on the project for the rest of the week. And here's just some more photos. You know, doing the Softbank treatment, the Softbank work is, you know, going to add a ton of habitat for the fish too, and stabilize the bank in a kind of a sustainable way. We're just using a ton of brush in here, incorporating a ton of willow. This project is 460 feet of bank work, and we're going to do about 260 feet of this brush work. And the remainder, we're going to do kind of more soft bank treatment, but less intensive on the woody material. This photo I just took like 15 minutes before I came to this meeting, but this is the operator and I were putting in these willow trenches in here, really try to get some roots established in here and shore up this bank that the landowner has been having issues with. Jim Olson also is the one who pinged this on our radar too, so really happy we're getting it done in the time frame we're getting it done on. With that project too, we're also doing 21 acres of juniper removal in the floodplain in the landowner's cottonwood galleries there. So pretty chock full of juniper, and we're hoping that taking those things out will free up some water, because you know, we're learning more and more that these junipers suck up a good amount of water, especially in this floodplain. So we have 21 acres of juniper removal and floodplain enhancement work that we're also doing at the same time. So I got the guy running the machine, and then I'm also running back and forth with a chainsaw and cutting down juniper. So it's the best part about my job, honestly, is getting these projects done. So super fun. Question?
What was the source for Westfield?
Yeah, what was the source of the cutties? Van Houten, I think. They came from Van Houten. Yep. Their peer, Kevin was telling me that there's a difference between West Slope cutties that are eastern and then West Slope cutties that are western. So we got the right fish in there.
I hope so. It was what, bass, I think Awesome, thank you, Ben. Best part of my job is hearing all of Ben's stories and remembering when I used to do that kind of thing. All right. Additional business. I've got one piece of additional new topic, but are there any other subjects that haven't been covered, or this is the kind of the time in our meeting for new topics? Yeah, I got yours teed up. Anything else anyone got burning? If not, we'll hand over to Jim McGee to talk about a new initiative, and then we will take a quick break, get snacked up, coffeed up, and then we'll give Brian the floor.
I just want to take a quick second to mention that we are fundraising for that lower Big Hole Stream Bait project. And so you can donate on our website. I sent out an email today with information about it, or you can text Big Hole to 26989 if you'd like to get involved with that project. Yeah, we're trying to raise $1,500 total for that project. So any little bit will help.
All right, and then everyone, Jim McGee will give us a little heads up on a new initiative.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm tag teaming with Jim Berkey tonight, so just wanted to bring you guys attention to a project we're working on that we have named Missouri Headwaters Working Lands Protection Project. And basically what it is, or what it evolved from, is over the last 5 years, we've been getting more and more landowners, ranchers coming to us requesting easements, conservation easements. And And we, Fish and Wildlife Service, don't have approval to spend any funding on easements unless it's in a designated area through our refuge system or a conservation area that has to be approved when there's 4 of them in Montana. So typically when a rancher comes to me and is interested in an easement, I call up Jim and he's our local expert and turn it over to him. And it's just been, and I will turn it over to you in a minute, but it's been amazing the interest in the past few years. And so hearing from the landowners, we have a realty program and our easements are through our refuge program. And then myself, our partners program that's on the ground, started having a discussion. Should we ask for approval to spend BHWC dollars on easements for landowners that are asking? And so that's what this project's about, is right now we wanted to start at the ground level. We're going to, local stakeholders. We went to the county commission. We're going to all the watershed groups in Southwest Montana, and we just want to hear. I think it's a good idea. Red flags, not. And so it's like it's a 2-year process, and right now we just want to talk to people and see what they think. And so we've got a steering committee that we've developed with a lot of the stakeholders, and we've asked Pedro to represent the watershed committee. And we will, we're going to have a process that we have to follow and then take it to the steering committee. And then hopefully in 6 months from now or sometime, come back to the whole group with a package and a map. So that's, just want to put it on your radar. I want Jim to fill in the gaps because he's knows more about this stuff than all of us.
Thanks, Jim. I don't want to take up too much space because it'd be interesting to hear any first, responses you all have, but maybe to add a little bit to what Jim was already saying. From my perspective, the Fish Wildlife Service has a really well-developed and really effective conservation easement program. They've been operating in other parts of Montana. It's the only area I can speak of, just Montana. In the Blackfoot, the Rocky Mountain front, having been at a lot of kitchen tables with landowners, a lot of folks are really satisfied with working with Fish Wildlife Service. So I would strongly, support that. I guess from my perspective, it seems like it works for traditional operators on working lands. They're really kind of open and understanding of the challenges that landowners face when they're considering how to design conservation easements. And then going back to I guess a little bit about the why. There's a lot of demand. When we have interest from a landowner, we need to find funding sources. We're finding it, a challenge to find enough funding, basically. So this program, with Fish Wildlife Service being a capable easement holder, opens up a door to a whole different source of funding that the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF, as you hear. And that funding source has been around since the 60s. It's generated from leases from offshore oil rigs. It goes into that annually goes into a federal pot. And for the last almost 50 some odd years, it hasn't, we haven't been able to tap into it fully, but during the Trump administration, there was a Great American Outdoors Act passed, and one of the components of that was allowing full funding. So up to $900 million are accessible every year nationally. So it's a good time to potentially create a new area in Southwest Montana because Fish Wildlife Service has better access right now to those funds than ever before. Like Jim said, this is all about, interested and willing landowners, right? So if this process goes through and the community supports it and Fish Wildlife Service is able to designate a new conservation area for easements in Southwest Montana, you're gonna not notice any difference unless you're interested in an easement, and then you'll have another option as a landowner. So there's no regulations, no costs. In my mind, there's very few downsides, but we want to make sure, folks understand it and we hear about, concerns before we get too far off the ground. So, yeah, I think that's why we're going to watershed groups, and we'd love to hear people's perspectives and any questions you have. Yeah, well, you know how to get a hold of this guy. So, it's like Jim said, it's a slow process. We're like about 5 or 6 months into, you know, kind of talking to the community. We've just formed the landscape steering committee that made us on. And we probably will be throwing stuff at that committee to chew on over the next few months, and then maybe we'll bring that to this group for your reaction. So stay tuned. We're not going very fast, but hopefully we'll get across the finish line in the next couple of years.
Can you guys just talk, what's changed? Why all of this, is this consistent and you've just hasn't had a vehicle, or has something shifted recently?
I wasn't even going to mention this, but so I got this job with Nature Conservancy. I moved from the Blackfoot down to Southwest Montana in 2010. And that coincided with an effort to do this back then. Some of my first meetings with landowners in the Big Hole were to kind of get a reaction to Fish Wildlife Service doing this back then. And back then it was attached to a broader proposal that was called the String of Pearls that went up the Missouri. And this was the last pearl, right? Because we're at the top. And one of those places that they were proposing to create a conservation area, it backfired. There was a reaction from the community that was, in my perspective, a little bit, you know, not founded in fact, but it made the service concerned enough that they canceled the whole thing. And so that, I don't know if that's answering your question. The other thing is the Great American North Shores Act really is like an impetus right now for us to say, let's take another shot at this. Yeah. We have land under demand on the rise, and there's funding out there, but we have to go through this process to make it happen. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I think I would add, different landowners want easements for different reasons, whether to get them out of a financial jam or just to make sure they would keep their ground in ag when they're gone, or estate planning. So I think, like, I've counted 10 big hole landowners that have come to me and said, what are these easements about? And all of them had slightly different reasons. But the other part, I think, is just seeing, you know, there's more people coming into our country and wanting to keep that open space and wanting to keep their culture. And from the Fish and Wildlife perspective, you know, we're super supportive because it's a great tool for wildlife, for corridors and open space and keeping our ranching culture and our recreational hunting and fishing. So we really like that as a tool in the toolbox. So.
Anyone? Concerns, comments? And if you don't want to say it out loud, you got my number. We'll talk in private. Yeah, and you know, privacy in these conversations is always super important, and we take that very seriously. So don't be shy and don't keep your, you know, your opinions to yourself, because otherwise things might happen that you don't like, and it's happening because you didn't speak up. So, but yeah, it sounds great to me, and the idea of more tools in the toolbox, boy, we can use every tool we've got, right? With that, any other parting or other notes of business? Otherwise, we will call a quick 10-minute break and then get ready for Brian. All right, let's enjoy some snacks, and we'll be back in 10. What's the word on the last one? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, hey, no worries. Yeah, so why don't and there is erosion. Oh, right. Yeah, right. I haven't voted it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't look as bad as it did. The guy just went in there and he was putting balls in the direction. So you could like yeah. Actually, I think I called him. I got it. Can't believe I got it. The reason I got it funded is because the tip you're going to count.
There's a lot.
Like that, private domain access. Yeah, the herd of cows came right at us. Yeah. And one across the fence, and you could hear him like, looking at the guys, the other guys like, looking at his phone. And they walk right out.
I go there, that is a Rob's opportunities for us. Yeah, I know. So I know they're all over there. That's what I like. River to the south that's a lot.
Driving me crazy. This is so blurry and I can't.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. You couldn't? Oh, use my eyes. There's got to be a way to make it a little more clear.
Scouting is one of our annual meetings.
Well, our annual meetings, that's Fairmont's projector.
Well, then I do remember this happening.
But yeah. Yeah. Maybe I just need to see this. Right. This was like maybe it's my eyes because I do need glasses. I see really well close up and not very well far away. Kevin sees really well far away, but not close up. So between the two of us, he's like, "What is?" Oh well, I guess that's as good as it's gonna get. I think he muted it for the break, maybe. Oh. Okay. Here's our baseline.
Yeah.
Actually, give me 1 second.
Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah, Wednesday, one day a week, and make it.
Not that now.
Keep up the great
So. It's supposed to shift slides.
It is.
Right.
Oh, I think.
Right. Yeah.
I've had issues with this before.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I learned that even in big conferences. Especially in those, that's what I'm. Right, how we're doing.
Well, I was trying to hook up the laser pointer, but it's not
I
working.
mean, the laser was lasering. I don't know
Yeah.
if the back and forth.
Right. The laser works. I was trying to hook it up so you could go back and forth, but it's not operating.
Yeah, no.
So you'll just have to hit the next arrow. I will make it full screen. Use the
Make sure that we're all ready on Zoom, but we'll hand it off here to Brian Wheeler, Executive Director of the Big Old River Foundation, and we're really great to have this program happening here on the Big Hole and informing us, and look forward to partnering with these guys in the future. So it's all yours. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me and coming to listen about what we're doing regarding water quality monitoring on the Big Hole. Basically, go ahead. Yeah. Ignore me. I'll just share your screen so you're on Zoom. All right. Here you go. I'll minimize that too. Get that off your screen. There you go. Perfect. Yeah. So I took over as the director of the foundation in 2019, and that's the same year we started the pilot project for this program. We had a guy named David Dockery, who a lot of you have met. He's been here at a bunch of these meetings. Who basically worked with the board and other watershed groups throughout the state to research, design, and implement a water quality monitoring program for the Big Hole. Okay, so the obvious question is why monitor water quality? What we found and shifted the foundation accordingly was that there was a pretty significant data gap on the Big Hole with regard to water quality, specifically sediment and nutrients. A lot of work has been done in the past. Restoration work that the Watershed Committee has done has looked and considered heavy metal pollution. What we wanted to do was address the data gap on a watershed scale from headwaters to mouth, specific to nutrient and sediments. Why monitor? Because it provides baseline conditions against which we can evaluate improvement or deterioration of water quality. We want to provide stakeholders and water managers with the objective evidence necessary to make informed management decisions. And this is an extraordinary resource, I think we can all agree, and it deserves our best effort at proactive science-based management. And bottom line, under the Clean Water Act, surface waters of the US are designated with specific beneficial uses that they should be capable of supporting. And those are aquatic life, irrigation, recreation, and drinking water. Therefore, monitoring water quality is an essential function. So that was the reason we started this project. Can't talk about water quality without discussing this acronym, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. This is essentially a pollution diet for the watershed, and that's the amount of pollutant tolerated before having a negative impact on one, more, or all of those beneficial uses I just mentioned. And during the development of these TMDLs for the Big Hole, which I believe was like 2001 to 7, somewhere in there, they divided the Big Hole watershed into 3 planning areas, basically upper, middle, lower. And that was for the final 2009 TMDL document that DEQ released. And the primary pollutants found in the Big Hole were nutrients, sediment, heavy metals, and water temperature. Originally, they used the 2006 303D EPA impairment list. That was updated to use the 2018 303D impairment list. And interestingly, there was fewer impairments noted in the 2018 list, but I'm not sure how they arrived at that because I don't think there was any consistent water quality monitoring done between 9 and 18 that would have justified removal of impairments. So as of 2018, the most recent one we have, there was 21 impairments in the lower and middle planning areas, and the upper Big Hole and North Fork had 37 impairments. And these impairments are right there, those nutrients, sediment, heavy metals, temperature. Those are sections of the river, tributaries, sections of tributaries. So at the end of the day, without regular monitoring to document whether the water quality is improving or deteriorating, we can't quantify whether these impaired stretches should A, retain their impairment status, or B, be removed from the Clean Water Act Section 303D impairment list. So it goes back to being an essential function for the management of our watershed. So back to our project, 2019. This is basically the steps we had to take initially to design a monitoring program for the Big Hole. Number one, we had to figure out where we were going to sample. David did a lot of work, a lot of driving time to figure out these 8 initial sites from Twin Bridges all the way up to Jackson that we chose. Sites had to be chosen according to access. Public access is makes it the easiest because year after year that's replicatable, replicable. Let's use real words. And so we do have one site on private land in Wise River, on the Wise River itself. Everything else is on publicly accessed parts of the river, generally at bridges. And you can see here, these are the bottles we use. So that's the second thing, analytes. We had to choose what we were sampling for. So in these bottle samples, these big ones, we take sediment samples. The lower ones are our nutrient samples. As I said earlier, nitrogen, phosphorus, nitrate, nitrite, and sediment are not commonly monitored in the watershed, so we chose those. Those go along with this piece of equipment right here, this very expensive piece of equipment is called the Pro DSS. It's a handheld sonde. So there are 4 probes in this encasement, and I stick that in the water and it comes back with readings for the water temperature, pH level, conductivity, turbidity, and dissolved oxygen levels, as well as barometric pressure. So this is what gets done every time we go out. I take the reading with this first, log that, and then we take bottle samples, then we fill in all our info in our field forms. And then, of course, you have to have quality control measures. And so we do field duplicates, 1 site per event. I do basically 2 bottle sample sets. And then we do field blanks. And field blank is to make sure that there's no contamination in the bottles from the lab. And I
use deionized water for that. So ideally, when that goes to the lab for analysis, the field duplicate comes back very similar to the regular site sample, and the field blank comes back as non-detect for everything we're looking for. Then we had to decide how frequently we were going to take samples. Initially, this pilot project, we decided we'd do twice monthly from April through June. And the reason being, that's when water level, the hydrograph is changing the most. And so we're seeing big fluctuations. As soon as the ice out happens, we get a big push of water, it drops, clears up, then we get the low snow melts, we get another push, then you get kind of proper runoff in May and June. And so that's when most sediment and nutrients are mobilized in the watershed, as those high flows when you get snow melt and rain. And so that's when most of the stuff is moving through the system. So twice monthly, April, May, June, allows me some flexibility to watch that hydrograph. And if we get a period of warm weather where it starts to climb, I can go out and try and sample at the peak of those pushes of water. And then July through September, that's what's called the summer growing period. And that is where we're typically at base flows. And so we only need to sample once monthly during that time period because there's not a whole lot of change in the hydrograph. And that is also what DEQ, when we submit data to the state, that's what they really look at, is that summer growing season when we're at base flows. You expect to see a lot of sediment and nutrients April, May, June moving through the system. What catches your attention is when you see it at base flows, when there's not a lot of change in the hydrograph. And these are the 2019 initial sites in the watershed that I take samples at. So we start in Twin Bridges, of course, and we work our way upstream so that we don't resample any water flowing downstream. So we always start at the bottom and work our way up. It's about well, I could do it in one day when it was just these 8 sites. Now we have 10, it takes me 2 days. It's like 350 miles. So it's quite a bit. 2020, the project changed a little bit, not a whole lot, but we were just basically refining things. This is the biggest part of 2020 though. This is when our project really got official. The sampling and analysis plan this was a big deal. This was approved by DEQ and we worked with them to write it, as a matter of fact. Then we had to develop funding and technical support partnerships. So DEQ, of course, has been, I think I saw actually on the Zoom, Abby Ebert was on there, which is awesome to see. She's our supervisor at DEQ. So thanks for being on here, Abby. Appreciate your support. We are part of their volunteer monitoring lab assistance support program. So not only did they give us the technical guidance to help us write that sampling and analysis plan, they also fund a lot of our lab analysis expenses. Send us the bottles and the coolers and send us the data when they're done analyzing with the lab. That lab is Energy Labs, the State Water Quality Lab up in Helena. And then we also worked with the Montana State Water Quality Extension. They worked closely with DEQ in this volunteer monitoring lab assistance support program. We went to some really good seminars they put on and how to design a good program, how to decide what your goals are, and how to meet the needs of your individual watershed. And there was a lot of interest from across the state of groups, both volunteer and paid groups, interested in learning how they can take up the mantle a little bit and sample, especially nutrients and sediments on their local watershed. Because the fact of the matter is the geography of Montana is way too broad for an agency to monitor every watershed every year, which we really need. So they also help us with data input, which is quite complicated for somebody like me, but we get a lot of support. So the SAP is our guiding document, and this is available. If anybody wants this document, happy to send it to you. This was approved by DEQ in April of 2020. We revise it or update it annually as needed. Last year we had to make some
some fairly significant changes just because there was new methodologies, standard operating procedures, best practices. So we updated everything accordingly. Contains a whole lot of background info on the watershed on impairments defined by DEQ during that TMDL assessment. And then this is the document that really makes our project and the data results valid to submit to state water quality reports. So huge overview on the watershed itself, goals and objectives, budget, our actual sampling process, down to the GPS locations, our methods, our field forms, quality control, all that kind of stuff. Happy to send this document. It's pretty dry and tedious, but if anybody is interested in looking through it, just contact me.
Right, does that mean that you're uploading it to the EQUIS?
Yes. Yeah.
Database, so online, not publicly available?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so Pedro just asked if we're uploading this data to the Montana EQUIS system, which is the water quality portal from the state of Montana. And yes, that's where this goes. And actually, once it's essentially verified in the EQUIS system, then it goes on to the National EPA Water Quality Portal. So it is pretty broad reaching. It's kind of neat to be out taking samples on the big hole and knowing that this data is winding up in EPA databases once it's verified. So then 2021, this year, we further refined the project and grew it just a little bit. We learned a couple of things in those first 2 years. Number one, April is not that easy to sample twice. You've got about 150 miles of river, and the conditions are very different from Skinner Meadows down to Twin Bridges in a month like April. So ice out, maybe above Dickey Bridge, it's totally frozen, even if it's warm and no snow on the ground in Twin Bridges. So we changed to just do one sampling event in April, and then partly due, actually a lot due to the concern over brown trout decline in the big hole, we decided to add a sampling event in October to characterize water quality during their spawning season. So that was added this year. That's the only month of data that I don't have yet. It's not been processed fully by the lab. So in our graphs, you won't see October. But I'm happy to pass that information along when I get it. Then 2021, we also did a new partnership with the Flathead Lake Biological Station and their new program called Monitoring Montana Waters. This is similar to the DEQ volunteer support program, wherein we get, you have to apply and you have to submit an approved sampling and analysis plan. But this allowed us to gain access to additional lab analysis funding, additional technical support, and additional equipment funding, which I'll get into a little bit later, but we were just able to leverage some funds against some cash from this program to get, Jared Payne's not here today, but as part of the CCAA program, he monitors water temperature on like 40 different tributaries and sections of the big hole. He was short about 10 data loggers for temperatures, so we were able to use that partnership to get him 10 loggers for this year. So we're pretty excited to help him out with that starting in 2022 on the upper big hole. And then this partnership also allowed us to add 2 new sampling sites in the upper river. So the North Fork of the Big Hole, we began this year, as well as the headwaters at Skinner Meadows. And so this is 2021 and beyond. This is where we're going to be sampling. I don't think we're going to add any more sites. This really covers the watershed pretty thoroughly. We have 7 main river, main stem sites, and 3 primary tributary sites, North Fork of the Big Hole, Deep Creek, and Wise River. Not only is the biggest influx of water, but also in particular, Deep Creek and Wise River have a lot of historic mining effect. And so we thought those would be good places to addition. And also
Watershed Committee's done a lot of work up here, restoration work. So it makes sense to continue sampling downstream of that and so we're seeing a reduction in sediment, a reduction in nutrients. So, yes, please. Yeah. That's what I hope to find out next year. The question was just asked with all the fires this summer, not only Alder Creek and Wise River, but also like Trail Creek up by Wisdom and the North Fork site. I'll show you in the graphs later. The North Fork was, I was expecting a bit more of an issue with nutrient sediment in North Fork. It was pretty clean this year. So I'm very interested to see what gets flushed down from that Trail Creek fire next year.
The Forest Service has a bigger area. It's basically a team that goes in after a fire and they estimate kind of what's the sediment loading going to be next spring. They're anticipating North Fork Big Hole having twice as much sediment this year. That fire was huge. And their report is finishing up now. And they're going to send it our way, but yeah, I mean, expect a lot of turbidity coming out of those systems in the spring. I don't know if there's a lot of mitigation measures that can be done on a landscape scale like that.
No, I don't think so. It's just...
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot is going to be flushed in. A lot is going to be flushed in from that. So it'll be interesting to see starting in April and how long that lasts when it settles down, and also kind of what impact that might have further downstream, in particular at the Mud Creek site, which is kind of a problematic site the last 2 years. We shall see. I'll present to you next year and tell you. So, as I said before, we were primarily interested in sampling for nutrients due to the data gap in that area. You hear this term a lot, nutrient loading. It's basically just nutrient pollution. It's an overabundance of nutrients in the watershed or water body, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus. What that causes or results in is a process called eutrophication. A water body becomes overly enriched, either by natural or artificial means, typically artificial. And then there's an overgrowth of plant life and a decline, or can be a decline in the biological community. Worst case scenario is a HAB, harmful algae bloom. So what we got up here, these are pictures I took 2 years ago. We had the significant algae bloom from about Maiden Rock down to Glen. And you can see there, it was bank to bank, thick coverage. This particular algae bloom was a native algae, Cladophora, but it was triggered by what we think and what DEQ thinks through the surface water technician they sent down to take samples and pictures. Along with me, was that it was kind of a perfect combination of conditions. You're going to have water clarity, current velocity, pH level, sunlight, water temperature, and then you got to have those nutrients in the system basically ready to uptake, or for these plants and algae to uptake those nutrients when those conditions are perfect. So a lot of that was conceivably flushed in. There was a heavy rain, really a flash flood in that Maiden Rock area, where we had videos we sent to DEQ of water at depth flowing down the Maiden Rock Road. So it is likely that that event flushed a whole bunch of extra nutrients into the river at a time of perfect conditions and resulted in this Cladophora bloom. It was ugly. It was a nuisance, certainly for the recreation community, but it was not toxic. However, if this happens over and over and over again, you run into problems of choking out bug life, changing bug and plant colonies in the watershed. And the biggest concern we have with algae is when they die. So, and that's part of this process of eutrophication. When the algae bloom like this, especially this thick stuff dies, the algae is decomposed by bacteria, and that process consumes dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen that fish and aquatic invertebrates need to live. So that is our primary concern with these algae blooms is hypoxia, which is essentially a really low level of dissolved oxygen. And you've probably seen and heard, like in the Gulf of Mexico, the giant dead zones. That's this on a huge scale. And it can cause, even in non-lethal levels of hypoxia, so say, for example, 5 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen is not good, but it's not lethal. But that can cause respiration, reproductive, and growth problems in fish and aquatic invertebrates. And I didn't see any studies on the brown trout, but there were quite a few studies showing that on rainbow trout. And then this bottom couple of pictures, this was on the beaverhead that I took 3 years ago. This was the worst case scenario, the harmful algae bloom. This is a blue-green algae. This is a toxic one. And this was, I mean, pardon? It was, yeah. It was below the dam, and by the time you got to High Bridge, it was gone. So this is toxic to cattle, pets, people. That's a problem. So this is one of the big reasons that we're focused on what we're seeing as far as nutrient loading goes in the big hole. Yeah, go ahead. That's speculation, but it tracks. I don't know. Everywhere. I mean, road runoff, any of the ranches that may have applied up there. If you got standing water, you know, like that, when it flushes out, that's going into the river. That was a unique event. You don't see that here very often. Although, as you discussed, you know, it's likely that we'll see that kind of thing more and more often, the extremes. Okay, so what are we actually finding? This is a sad picture up at Mud Creek in September. I believe the flow was 60 CFS there, and it was 3 at Wisdom at that time, 3.04. So obviously you got a lot of algae, you got high water temperatures, well over 70. Very few fish in that area, they will move out. And the highest levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in 2020, we found between Jackson and Mud Creek Bridge. That's where this site is, this picture. It's just downstream of the Mud Creek Bridge. And those results in 2020 is that's what prompted us to add the 2 new upper river sites at Skinner Meadows and North Fork of the Big Hole, just to try and narrow down where we might be seeing a source of this, and just trying to better characterize upper river water quality. What we saw in 2021 was similarly high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, particularly at Wisdom and Mud Creek, those 2 sites. The other thing we saw at Mud Creek in particular were extremely high readings of dissolved oxygen that we take with a handheld sonde. And I think in August and September, I was taking readings greater than 150% saturation of dissolved oxygen at Mud Creek during the day. Now, algae produces oxygen as part of the photosynthesis process. And so during the day, you expect to see higher levels of dissolved oxygen when algae is producing it. What that suggests is that there's a huge drop off in dissolved oxygen levels at night when algae is consuming oxygen and not in the photosynthesis process. So geography again adds a hurdle for me. For me to go to Mud Creek by itself and check dissolved oxygen levels at dawn when they're typically lowest, it's a 150-mile round trip. So as part of that new partnership with the Flathead Lake Biostation, we got those 10 temperature loggers for FWP, but then we also were able to get our program a dissolved oxygen logger that we will deploy somewhere by Mud Creek here for 2022 and beyond to track the diurnal fluctuations of dissolved oxygen. So we can basically set that logger to take readings every hour of the day or every 20 minutes if we wanted, and then go download that data. So this will give us a much, much better picture of what kind of fluctuations are occurring with dissolved oxygen at this most problematic site at Mud Creek. So we're excited to get that out and see what we come up with. And then I just put this on here. This is just our field forms. So this is what I'm filling out every time this gets downloaded, and this data here also gets uploaded to that EQUIS Montana State Water Quality Report. This is our locations, what instruments we're using, when we collected bottle samples, whether or not we did a duplicate or field blank, what the flow was, what gauge we're using, and then all of our readings. And then I always make notes, you know, if we see something unique. This one from July is when we started seeing the substantial algae growth at Mud Creek, which is pretty early. Then also the analytes we're testing for and the preservatives used. So this is like a sulfuric acid we have to add to the nitrate, nitrite, and phosphorus samples. The rest are on ice. They have got to, I had no idea my ice budget was going to be so big. We spent like $250 on ice alone just to send these samples because they have to reach the lab at less than 6 degrees Celsius. And if they don't, it qualifies your data. So I wound up driving these to Helena every hot month this year just to make sure that the shipping problem didn't result in qualified data. We didn't lose a cooler, and
Yeah.
oh,
Lost a cooler.
just the sheer sadness of the amount of time and money invested in that to lose a cooler is brutal. So yeah, so that's why I drove them to the lab. Yeah. It's so much time and energy to collect those that, yeah, you want to make sure that your data is accounted for and valid. And then, you know, I had a point when I was looking back through as I was making this presentation, it's not always, you know, concerning things like algae growth or bad things. Sometimes it's funny. I looked at the one in May and I noted to myself on this form that I had to sample 100 yards upstream of our normal site due to aggressive nesting sandhill cranes. So sometimes it's a moose and you gotta just adapt and not get too close. But this, not only do we scan these forms and include them in our data on multiple external hard drives, but we also download it directly from the handheld, and that is uploaded to the EQUIS portal as well. And then this is where your brain starts to melt and your eyes go cross. This is what's pending for me starting about January 1st. These are all our sites, the dates, the time, the levels, or the results of each of our samples, water temp, air temp, then all the handheld readings. This is what we actually put into an Excel sheet and then it was in the portal. The reason I put this on here was to show you, I just did these to help give us an idea of these levels with regard to sort of limits established that might negatively, like if it's above that limit, it might negatively impact beneficial uses, mainly aquatic life and recreation, sometimes drinking water as well. But the light cell coloring there, that is a result that was over that threshold. The medium is a result that was double the threshold for, in this case, phosphorus, and the dark one is a result that was triple that limit for phosphorus for beneficial use. So it kind of gives you just a quick perspective on how often and when, you know, what times of year we're seeing levels that exceed those limits. This is, it's hard to see on here, but this is low to upstream, so downstream to upstream and by date. So this is 6/5 and 6/6, and then this was the second one of June, 6/20, 6/21. So yeah, we start with the earliest and the downstream.
Right?
Yeah.
You may address this for, feel my ignorance on how this works, but I would imagine that, some of these like phosphorus or the percent of those or the readings will be affected by the amount of water levels in a lot of it. Is that true? Like, I mean, well, I guess the question is it a given that there's a source of these pollutants that you can address, or is it that related to potentially just the fact that you have less water?
Yeah.
And therefore higher saturation levels in the water of those, toxins or those nutrients?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. But as the readings are milligrams per liter, it's kind of irrelevant what the flow is. It's not a percentage. It's just a straight figure, milligrams per liter, whether it's running at 1200 CFS or 100 CFS. So I don't think so, but it is a valid question.
Yeah, I guess the thing driving that is that, like, are those nutrients in some ways can be in the system? And if you have more water, it's less of a problem.
They have done quite on the phosphorus molecule in particular. DEQ's done quite a lot of work, especially because of the huge blooms they were seeing on the Smith River.
Yeah.
And now I'm not a chemist, so this is above my pay grade, but in talking with their surface water technician, it seems that the phosphorus molecule in particular has the ability to wait it out in a system, if you will. I don't know how better to phrase that. But that molecule is, for whatever reason, less likely to get flushed right on through the system and more likely to hold up in the substrate or attach to rocks or sediment particles. And that makes it more of an issue for when those water conditions are just right for uptake. So that may have been added to the system, say during runoff, but you won't actually see an impact from it until conditions are perfect with flow, pH, light transfusion, all that kind of stuff.
So Brian, if you want, I can answer some of that question. So yeah, hi. I'll introduce myself quick. Brian kind of already did. My name's Abby Ebert, and I'm the volunteer monitoring coordinator for the state of Montana and run the volunteer monitoring lab analysis support program. But my title is like a water quality monitoring specialist with the state. And so to get to the phosphorus question, so the main difference between phosphorus and nitrogen is like the charges that the molecules have. So the easiest way to think about that is phosphorus is a positively charged molecule, and that makes it easier to bind to sediment. And so that's why you see phosphorus flushed into system during runoff events, because it typically comes attached to that sediment that's during runoff. Nitrogen, on the other hand, is negative, and so it flows through water and does not bind to sediment as easy. And so we see nitrogen concentrations during runoff, but also we see it a lot due to groundwater influence, and that's why, because it can move through groundwater more easily. So that's kind of the difference between how you manage those nutrients through different BMPs and things like that. To get onto like loads and his question with that. So currently, none of the segments in the big hole are listed as impaired for any specific nutrients. And so there's currently no TMDLs or total maximum daily loads for specifically nitrogen or phosphorus. So we don't have, and the TMDL documents will list sources. So there's no currently listed sources for nutrients from DEQ on the Big Hole River.
Thanks, Abby. This is a really good explanation.
One just sort of an anecdote or visual that I have at the headwaters. At the headwaters of California Creek, doing Superfund restoration, it kind of blew me away. There's nothing upstream, right? There's no heavy grazing, there's no wastewater plant, there's nothing, right? Emitting into that system, yet we put in these beaver mimicry structures and backed up 3 feet of sediment, and we had these mats and mats of this algae that would just cover our structure. They were actually a great addition to the sediment retention. They actually created like this impermeable barrier. But I was thinking, I was like, what the heck is causing this, right? And just asking around, it's just phosphorus is just highly present in our soil samples. It's just part of the parent material of that system. And that was kind of just an eye opener for me that, you know, you see something, it looks green, it looks alien, and you're like, oh, something's causing this, right? And sometimes that's not the case, you know?
Yeah, and that's a really good point to make, is that these are naturally occurring nutrients. That's what allows for the growth of plants. And they are released from weathering from rocks and soils, like Pedro was just saying. Where you have a problem or an issue is when there's excess nutrients more than the system can uptake and make use of. And that's when you get those massive algae blooms. And like the one from 2 years ago on the Big Hole, it was a native algae. It wasn't something odd or out of place other than the quantity. And that's due from just the excess nutrients, even though they are naturally occurring. So this is the bread and butter here. Flathead Lake Biostation helped me in the last couple of days to put together these graphs, just to get a better visualization of 2020 and 21. This black line down the middle is the demarcation line between years. So 2020 over here, 2021 over here. This is total nitrogen milligrams per liter in the main stem, our 7 main stem sites on the Big Hole. Obviously, you see these huge pushes when you get runoff or high water events. What you really start to be conscientious of and kind of catches your attention is when you see these high levels at base flows. So July, August, September. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, you know, you got Mud Creek in the yellow and Wisdom in the gray. And those are kind of the 2 primary, I would say, problematic sites that we've found in the last couple of years as far as amount of nitrogen, phosphorus in the water at base flows. You can see this year, you know, we didn't have much of a runoff. So this was in May, and, you know, it was a little earlier than normal. But by June 20th, we were really at base flows this year by June 20th, which is way early, of course. So this particular year, you know, we were down, less than half of average, less than a third of average flow. And then, like I said, I don't have October's, but then by the time you get to September, we're back below that nitrogen limit. And then these are the tributaries, which you can see not a big problem in the 3 tributaries, Wise River, Deep Creek, and North Fork of Big Hole, with regard to nitrogen influx. Other than maybe, you know, high water here in May, everything else is well below. And then this is phosphorus, a little harder to read because of this huge push from last year's ice out, which there was some cool video of the ice breaking up, and you get a real good idea of how much water pushes through that system when that releases. So that was huge. A lot of stuff, sediment and nutrients were mobilized at the end of April last year, and of course way down. But again, you're seeing kind of July, August, September, Wisdom, Mud Creek, kind of the chronic problem areas, at least for the last 2 years that we've seen. And then this is 2021. You see it's interesting that Jackson had quite a bit more phosphorus in it all through from June, July, August, and September this year than last year. So, and then we'll do tributaries again, kind of similar to nitrogen, where in just wasn't as much of it in the 3 tributary sites as there was in the main stem. Again, it'll be interesting to see what happens with North Fork of the Big Hole in particular, when all the junk from the Trail Creek fire flushes down. So the nutrients will be interesting. Oh, and then I just want to touch on real quick, that's kind of the end of the nutrients. I just want to show those graphs. That's what we're actually seeing, what the data is actually showing. But the other part of our project is the macroinvertebrate sampling. And we added this, it was not initially intended to be part of our project, but we went ahead and added macroinvertebrate sampling in the fall of 2019 during our pilot project. It kind of in response to local concern over declining hatches. I know this group has heard a little bit about that from the folks here, but also as part of Roy's efforts with the George Grant Drought Monitor chapter and Dave Stagliano doing his 10-year replicate study at 2 sites. And Jim Olson, fisheries biologist here, recommended that we proceed with both of these projects. Dave's has that time frame that is really interesting to compare 10 years between sites, and our project is going to have more geographic breadth, going from Twin all the way up to Jackson, where we take samples. So our 6 sampling sites for bugs on the Big Hole are High Road Bridge, Costa Bridge, Jones Hole. Liz, thank you very much for letting me walk in there this summer. You saved me a lot of time and energy dragging the raft down to take samples at that site. And then we do Deep Creek and Wisdom and Jackson. And the reason we do this is part of a water quality project is because mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies are sensitive to pollution and habitat degradation. So the evaluation of their relative abundance and diversity is often used to evaluate water quality and habitat quality. So just, for example, with sediment, anytime you see like a decline in stoneflies, it often is associated with a loss of interstitial space between the pebbles and rocks because of sedimentation. So for example, if you have a low runoff year with very few bank full flow days, you're likely to have more sedimentation, and certainly it's possible that you'd see fewer stoneflies. And then while the physical and chemical measurements of water quality, i.e. our bottle samples and handheld readings, provide data on pollutant concentrations, it's the bug sampling that can help us understand how these pollutants might be affecting the biological health of the ecosystem. So we went ahead and added that in 2019. We've done 4 sampling events, 1 in 19, spring and fall during 2020. Quickly realized that was cost prohibitive, so we went back to 1 year or once annually, and we take those samples in the fall, typically late September, early October. I would love to do spring and fall. It's expensive, and it's really hard with the weather to do it consecutive days between Twin and Jackson. Sometimes it's iced up for 2 weeks longer up there, and that just doesn't work for your time frame sampling. So that's why we do it in the fall. Hell of a lot more comfortable to scrub rocks in the September anyway. So sampling day, those 6 sites, we use the Hess sampler, this metal cylinder with handles that we jam into the stream bed, and the water flows through this tapering dolphin head down into the collection cup. Then we dump it into the seine. These are, you can't see it, but these are 4 dragonfly nymphs, really cool bugs. And then we rinse everything out, scoop this up and put it into bottles and preserve it with 99% isopropyl alcohol. We do 3 replicates at each site. And so at the end of the day, there's 18, or at the end of the 3 days that it takes me to do it, there's 18 of these bottles. And then I drive those up to Manhattan, where the lab we work with is River Continuum Concepts. And this is their lead entomologist, Brett Marshall, and his lead assistant entomologist, Merle. Those guys came out and helped us in that first year. They told us exactly how we needed to be doing it. They helped us choose sites. and they've been a really good resource for the bug part. And then just a really cool picture of some salmon flies, both nymph and adult stage. And then this is what we're going to be doing with this, this bug data. So the 3-year plan was to collect these samples at the 6 sites for 3 years, out of which we got 4 sampling events. And I'm currently raising money to commission River Continuum Concepts to produce a lab analysis report on the diversity and relative abundance of macroinvertebrates at these 6 sites over 3 years to use as a rough baseline of bug health going forward. 3 years isn't a huge amount, but it gives us a good starting point. And then part of that expense is that Brett is going to take into account as much historic data as possible, you know, certainly differing methods, locations, results, and just decades worth of time in between sampling will impact how much that historic data is relevant, but it will be included in the report, including Dave's recent report. And then the idea here is that once we get a rough baseline of bug health, then afterwards, whether it's annually, biannually, whatever we can afford to do, we can commission mini reports that will be compared to this baseline and allow us to track changes in bug life throughout the big hole. Then in about 7 years, when we're in the 10th year of this project, we will do another big report to kind of redefine all those indices and our definitions of what normal means for bug life in the big hole. As with any data collection project, whether bugs, water quality, or anything else, the longer you can maintain and collect the project, and collect, the more valuable that data becomes. And so our goal is to do this in perpetuity so that we have a historic record that anybody else from a university, from another organization, an agency is able to, you know, open source access this data and hopefully use it for making good management decisions. And then what next? This is where we're at now. We got 2 years in, which frankly is not a lot. Typically, an assessment of a chronic problem would be more like 3 to 5 years of data. So we're in the early stages, but we are seeing a trend in that upper river, particularly Wisdom and Mud Creek, that we're definitely going to be keeping our eye on with regard to nutrient and algae. So our goal is to continue this project as long as we possibly can. Forever would be ideal. Track current conditions of nutrients, sediments, and macroinvertebrates, build a historic record that will allow us to identify trends over time. And then the other big thing that this allows us to do is alert stakeholders to current and emerging issues with water quality. You know, Pedro sent a lot of info out this summer about, in particular, the drinking water for Butte. The increase by, what was it, like 22% this year compared to last, of Butte's drinking water coming from the big hole. So there are larger concerns here than, say, the fly fishing industry or the ranching community. This is about aquatic life and drinking water as well. Every single one of us depends on clean water. The economies also do. The impairment status. Eventually, these TMDLs will need reassessed. And when that happens, you know, we're going to need the data to show whether they're still impaired or not. And then my goal is to collaborate with this group and figure out local solutions and lean on the landowner network with the community here. And I'd love to provide this info, and I hope that it helps inform your restoration work and strengthen your grant requests. I think the best thing we can do at a local level is kind of narrow down, identify these problem areas, and figure out funding to design projects to address it. And that improves water quality on the big hole for all its users, fish, bovine, or otherwise. And then ultimately, the goal is to ensure that the Big Hole River, as the surface water of the U.S., is able to support the beneficial uses of aquatic life, recreation, irrigation, and drinking water. cows, fish, and people, we all need clean water, and we all live downstream. So thanks for your time. Any questions? Sure. Ask Abby. Yeah. Sure.
Part of the problem with the TMDL process years ago was
Let me give you this, Randy.
this is an opinion, so part of the process of TMDLs and how they declare the TMDLs was what I call windshield appraisals. And Liz probably remembers this from years ago. But the people that work for DEQ or EPA or whoever drove along the river or used stuff from fish, wildlife, and parks. And so if you go back and look at those old reports, it was always logging, mining, and agriculture that caused the impairments. Never mentioned highways or railroads or, you know, all the other things. So I think that's part of the reason why some of those streams were pulled off. The impairments. But I don't know, that's my opinion. So that's actually what you're doing. Document what's really there.
I think we don't know what we don't know, so we're trying to figure out what we don't know.
I guess I just want to add something. So I looked at the assessment reports, and for the big hole, the reason that some of the impairments were taken off was for flow regimen. And it was, when they looked back at some of the data, it wasn't like all there for us to, I think, make some assessment decisions. So there wasn't like any major like impairments taken off that are related to the TMDLs themselves, because there was no TMDLs with the impairments that were removed in 2018.
So bottom line, collecting data is important. That's how we make informed decisions. And that's why we began this project, was to address that data gap. Yes.
So the reason the impairments were taken out was something to the flow and they didn't have the data.
I didn't hear, Abby, what you said with regard to flow specifically, but I think what she said is that they didn't actually have a TMDL associated with it. So total.
I'll pull it up again. Hold on. I gotta scroll.
And Abby, is it true that without data, after a certain period of time, the impairment just goes away?
No, so the impairment does not go away unless it is the water body is reassessed and determined that it is not impaired. So the impairment will stand until it is remonitored and reassessed to determine non-impairment. But to get back, so in the 2018 cycle, they removed low flow alterations as a cause of a primary contact recreation impairment. The use support of the primary contact recreation changed to not assessed, as it no longer had any causes associated with it. The aquatic life impairment remains listed for low flow alterations. Low flow alterations cause was changed to low flow regimen modification per EPA cause list. So that's a lot of jargon, I know, but it was looking at the beneficial use of that impairment. So they took off the impairment for the beneficial use of primary contact recreation or just recreation in general, but the impairment still stands as a flow regimen modification for aquatic life. So it's kind of how we like view impairments based on beneficial uses.
And Abby, real quick, how often are these supposed to be reassessed?
There's no time frame for reassessing water bodies. DEQ will look at reassessments if there has been changes within the watershed. So if we see changes that are getting better and we know that funding and restoration efforts have gone, or best management practices have been put in place and has shown like improvements in the water body, we'll go back and reassess to see if we can list it or delist it. But if there's no changes in the water bodies and the watersheds, and it won't change the assessment decision, we won't go back and reassess at the time.
So we're in the process. There have been some delistings. I think in DEQ's done some. A lot of them are, there's a mine, there's an adit, there's some metals coming out of that adit. They fix the adit. They take the metals listing off. Like, there's examples of that in the state. We're looking at the entire French Creek Basin. Just like as Abby explained, DEQ has pumped lots of money through their 319 program to us to do the restoration project that you guys have heard about for years and years now. We've kind of documented in our project, okay, 800 tons here, 1,300 tons here. When we look at that TMDL document, it says, you should reduce sediment in this drainage by this many tons. And when we add up all the projects we've done, we've more than exceeded that amount of sediment reduction. So that was enough of a justification, and we're working now. That's what Max our health intern this summer was doing, was going back to that TMDL document, going back to those locations and starting to resample. And DEQ they've been great to work with. They're kind of working with us on figuring out how do you even go about delisting a whole basin. And it turns out, not that they don't know, but they've never gone through the process themselves. It's not like they're going to go back and say, you're going to sample right at a restoration site. They have to follow very specific criteria as to where their sample sites are, and they've got to keep those consistent. So it may be that they go back to all of French Creek, and despite all our work, because of how the whole system is stratified, it may look just the same as it did 10 years ago. I hope not. But that may be an outcome of this whole process, right? And that'll be informative as well, I hope, for the DEQ, just to even look at the whole TMDL process. Because I once said something that kind of offended one of our partners at DEQ. I said, DEQ isn't in the business of delisting. They are in the business of delisting, they just haven't gotten there yet, because they've still been really deep into the TMDL process of documenting the contaminants. So anyway, I think this is huge, and having that Deep Creek site, that'll come in handy as we go and make the case for delisting French Creek. So this is awesome. EPA document, the 303 DPS. That's the EPA document. That's the main one, list of impairments to impaired water bodies. It's like,
it wasn't a new assessment, it was just put on a list.
Correct. Any other questions?
One question, Brian.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the hard work and the data. Ultimately, yeah, will help the troops. I have one question about the macroinvertebrate study, specifically salmon flies. There's been a huge change, and I've had a bird's eye view of that the last 30 years in Melrose, where there's been clearly a decline. And there was a big study done back in the 80s by an entomologist out of Helena that showed that sedimentation in that Melrose section that's coming off the canyon, it was already noticeable that the numbers were dropping. And I know in your sampling, there's a pretty big gap between Glen and going all the way up to White River. And I think that, in terms of really looking at that and knowing it's probably the biggest hit for salmon loss on the entire river, and it's probably because of sedimentation, that maybe adding another site somewhere in there to really get a feel for it. It's really going to drop.
Yeah. So we scoped that whole canyon out for an appropriate site, and it's got to be just the right kind of ripple to effectively sample with a HES sampler. So those baby head size rocks, like Halsted Ridge is my least favorite site because there's so many of these size rocks. It's really difficult to effectively sample. So you have to find a riffle that you're able to get 3 replicates in with, say, 12 or 15 feet between samples. So it's got to be kind of an extended riffle with the right size gravel to be able to effectively sample. We took a day and drove through the entire canyon and got out and walked the river to try and find a little bit closer spot to the center canyon. The best we came up with that we were able to, part of the data collection process is replicability. The next person that takes over this job has to be able to do it. So this one is a little difficult at the Jones Hole there in Wise River because we have to float to it. But that was the best riffle that we could find as close to the center part of the canyon that was appropriate to add a new site. I wouldn't be opposed to trying to figure out an additional site dead in the middle of the canyon. It's expensive. And, I don't know if I mentioned, I'm the only employee of the foundation. So this entire project is me and 1 volunteer. So it's a lot. And that would be a long-term goal, but we have to get there incrementally. And just getting this project off the ground was a massive mobilization of funding and people's time and energy. But there's room for growth. So hopefully we can see what we see in the 3-year baseline study, which I'm hoping will be done by the end of next year. And I'll make that available for public consumption to see exactly what you're talking about. We hear that the observational anecdotes of the decline, and in the last 10 years, I've seen it too. But what does the data say? Dave's report said that there was his 10-year gap report said that there was a very minor decline in stoneflies and mayflies, while there was a pretty huge increase in caddisflies over that time in the 2 sites he did. I think what our project might allow for is other groups and other people to flesh those questions out. This is a starting point. And in particular, like a graduate student can go measure the sediment in those interstitial spaces between rocks to determine whether that correlates with a stonefly decline. So this is a starting point that I'm hoping other folks can flesh out these questions like we have. Yeah, well, the board really got it started. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. We're making sure nobody on Zoom got any current questions. All right. Year 2021. This was the year that we were going to turn a corner and everything was going to get good, right? So maybe 2023, that's going to be the year. All right. Thanks, everybody. It's been a heck of a year. Hope everybody has a great holiday. We will not be meeting in December. Our governing board will be meeting in January. And so our next open community meeting will be February. And I think we've got that lined up. The Forest Service is coming. They're going to be talking about some of their firefighting activities and also the Pillar Face project that is now finally kind of getting up and running. So that will be February, but we'll see governing board. We'll see you in January. And great to see everybody here. Thank you for coming and hope you all have a great, lovely holiday. All right.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks so much, Abby. It was super helpful.
Yeah. Can I get on the email list for these monthly meetings? I'm not gonna obviously make it to all of them, but it'd be nice to know when you're talking about monitoring because it's good to hear your updates. So.
Absolutely, yeah. If you go to BHWC.org,
Uh-huh.
I'll put it right here.
there's a, right on the front of that website, there's a little place to put your email and then you'll automatically get on our newsletter.
Okay, cool.
That's the way to do it. Thanks so much. This is super helpful for us.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good rest of your evening.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Pedro.